Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you all here today at our Rural Frontier Housing Learning Lab. Got a great group. This learning lab is in collaboration between us, my group, Montana State University Extension, the Community Vitality Program, and then NeighborWorks Montana and the Montana Healthcare Foundation. So we're really excited to work together on this, and we're glad to have such a great group of folks with us today. Are you ready for the next slide, Larry? Get to introduce you.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. All right, so we'll go ahead and go through just what each of our individual organizations does a little bit, and then we'll kind of dive in. So NeighborWorks Montana is where I work. I'm based out of Great Falls, but our mission is really we're dedicated across the state to support all communities with financing and education opportunities. And we do that in a few different ways. At NeighborWorks Montana, we kind of have a few areas that we work to support housing. We have housing education and counseling provided through a partner network across the state of Montana. We provide lending services to home buyers that need additional down payment when purchasing a home, as well as developers to promote new housing developments across the state. And lastly, we work in the state to help residents of mobile home parks and other naturally occurring affordable housing to organize and take control of their own communities, which makes them more affordable and stable for the residents. And Tracy, I think you're next.
Okay, thanks, Larry. I'm Tracy Minuet. I'm with the Montana Healthcare Foundation. I'm a senior program officer, and I work in a couple of different initiatives that I'll talk about here. For those of you not familiar with Montana Healthcare Foundation, we are an independent 501c3 private foundation. We are the largest health-focused foundation in the state. So we really do serve as kind of a permanent resource to help communities tackle their health problems. We spend a lot of time doing policy analysis. So you may have seen this a lot in some recent policy analysis around the Medicaid program. We also work to help communities support health and well-being, for reasons. I primarily work in our social determinants of health programming. So that's folks that maybe have poor health outcomes as a result of income, geography, availability and accessibility to health services, and other health disparities. So we support 11 different initiatives. I work in Housing is Healthcare and Healthy Montana Communities, which are really focused around providing permanent housing solutions. And that, of course, is our interest in being here with this group. So thanks so much for having me. Now on to you, Tara.
Great. Well, my name is Tara Mastel, and I work for Montana State University Extension. I am the program leader for Community Vitality, our Community Vitality program. And many of you, I'm sure, know about Extension, but for those of you that don't, Extension is the outreach arm of the university, and Montana State is the land grant university. So every state every state has a land grant university, and each land grant has Extension. In Montana, we have about 94, it fluctuates, but we have about 94 extension agents located all across the state. And you can see that in the map there. And we have 26 subject matter experts that are primarily located at the university. So we are all over the state, and we are kind of based in communities, and we are very aware that housing is a big issue. It was the #1 issue that came out in our needs assessment that we did, our statewide needs assessment. So that's why we're working on housing, and really happy to collaborate with my two colleagues here today, because we have the connections in the community, but we don't necessarily have that housing expertise. So we're glad to partner with folks that have that expertise, and we can hopefully connect in with the local communities. So glad to be here. All right, well, let's get started. So today is our session. What we're planning to cover is really helping introduce you all to some of the very basics of affordable housing, so that you can understand kind of the lay of the land and why those things matter. And we want to talk to you a little bit about why housing is important in your community. We want to hear from you, and then also share a little bit about that from the research and the information that we have on housing. we want to discuss strategies on how to meet housing needs and also really talk also about frontier communities, communities that, they have rural communities in the East Coast as well that are, for us would be pretty densely populated. But in Montana, we have pretty sparse population, and that is has different implications for when you're working on housing. So with that, I'll pass it on to Larry.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. So it's really good for us to kind of begin with a brief review of some basics. So I apologize if we bore anyone. I'm going to go through just this really quickly. Costs, when we're talking about costs that kind of determine AMI and affordability, we're talking about your rent or your mortgage, and we're inclusive of utilities. So really all the costs that go toward paying for a place to live. Household income, also HH income, is the full income of everyone in the household. And then we consider AMI, which means area median income. That's kind of the statistic between what the household income is versus the household area income. So you can look at the fun little calculation there, but it's really important to understand that there are some things that we face through this process. And when we're talking about housing, is not everyone has a shared language or understanding of just kind of some quick concepts. So talking about some misconceptions there. And then what is affordable housing? So affordable housing, when you define it, housing is considered affordable when costs are less than 30% of the overall household's income. So housing is really, and affordability is really dependent on that income, but also a number of other factors. So that's just one thing to get us started. And I think I'm going to pass it on to Tracy.
Yeah, I'm going to dig in really quickly on this whole area median income piece and affordability. I know that one it's one that feels like always a little bit wonky. And so the reason that we talk a lot about area median income and kind of our housing bubble is that it is the driver for a lot of the assistance programs that you might be considering using to either help build housing in your community or help people buy housing in your community. So it is just kind of one of those pieces of kind of like walking around knowledge that is nice to have. So area median income for the purposes of housing is set by HUD. So it's going to also be different than when you look up what's family median income, what the census tells you. So this is just kind of an important thing. You can find these limits on HUD's website. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about it, right, is for much of Montana, there's sort of what's considered to be like a base area median income. So there are multiple counties in Montana that have these exact same income limits. So I pulled 2 counties that have these income limits. The other thing that I always really like to do is ground the area median income to like actual incomes. So when I'm talking to someone, I don't want to say, oh, a household at 80% of area median income. That means nothing to like anyone whatsoever. What I instead want to say is like, oh, well, we're talking about a household of, 4 that's maybe earning, around $60,000 to $65,000, depending on household size. That gives people a much better idea about like who you're actually talking about in the community. And it's one of the kind of easy, it's sort of one of the easy, I guess, potholes to sort of avoid. Because I think a lot of times when we start talking about housing affordability in our communities, people are like, oh, well, we don't want that kind of housing. But when you start saying, hey, you know what, we're talking about a household that's earning $60,000 a year, that makes it a lot easier for them to then connect. Oh, who is that actually in my community? And so then it's not just, oh, we're bringing people in who need help. It's like, oh gosh, this is how much a teacher starts at in my community. This is how much, the nurse at the hospital earns. And I think it makes it a little bit easier. So we always try to go, when we're setting kind of policy and having these discussions, we're going to talk about AMI and area median income. But it's really important to, as quickly as possible, translate that into what does that really mean for what a household is earning in your community. But I think in this case, I also just think it's really interesting, right? So if we are talking about something like housing down payment assistance, for instance, that might have an income limit of 80% of area median income. So in Hill County, Sorry, I picked up a cold for my kids this weekend, so I'm going to probably cough through this whole thing. In Hill County, the Q3 2024 median home price was just under $200,000. And these are the numbers reported from Montana Department of Revenue. I understand that a lot of times when we look at these numbers, we're like, I couldn't find a house in my community for that, but this is the best I have. So just under $200,000. So you'd need an income, of about $60,000 or 70% of area median income, running a lot of assumptions, right? In Beaverhead County, the Q3 2024 median home is about $100,000 more. So you would need to have about $90,000 in income. And that means that for that household, that's about 105% of area median income for a household of four. So you're talking right there about the difference in one household may be able to actually utilize down payment assistance, and one household may not be able to utilize down payment assistance. So that's where I think it's kind of important to think about it. I think just being aware of it and how it might impact our work and our policy discussions as we go through this is just helpful and important. So it's like a little bit of a grounding there. With that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Tara, to talk a little bit about the importance of housing in our communities.
Yes. So I want to pause here and ask you to put into the chat, why do you think housing is important? What is it about housing that what's going on? Why is it important for you and your community to have that housing? So throw into the chat some things that you think about when you think of why housing is important. Okay, so Cheyenne Wallace is from Glasgow, and she's saying housing issues go hand in hand with workforce issues. That's so true. Alan Davis says it'll bring more residents to our town, recruiting employees. We have a hard time recruiting employees. Yeah, we hear that a lot, that it doesn't matter how many jobs you have in your town, you don't have anywhere for them to live. Tara Berman says stability, maintain an adequate workforce. Joanne in Red Lodge. Michaela Paul, we need housing now, but as the mine comes in, we need even more housing. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And Tina Toyne is in Hardin, and she's saying recruiting employees. So that's very much a common theme. Missy saying basic need for our folks to be safe and successful for their life. Absolutely. Sheriff Hedges, we have lost folks that have been given and accepted employment offers because they could not find an affordable place to live. Yes, I've heard in, I think it's maybe in the Flathead, that they won't even interview you for a teacher position until you prove that you have housing. Cassie Coburn says more inventory to level out the housing prices due to no inventory available. Yeah, so hopefully hoping to get them affordable. Allows people to stabilize in their city and contribute long-term to the community. Gives them dignity in their housing situation. Absolutely. Okay. Looks like we had a lot. So let's share what we have here from our work that we've got going on here. So economic stability is from the perspective of housing professionals. We heard a lot of that from the group. Economic stability for housing for families and community supports workforce. Seems like that's a big concern of the folks that have joined us today. Attracts employers. I don't know that anybody said that. Maybe they did. Strengthens communities and allows for aging within the community. I don't know if we heard anybody talk about aging either. So yeah, that's I think we're all on the same page here.
All right. So with that, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about kind of what I call the housing continuum, but I think this is just like your housing ecosystem. And, I think I saw comments in there, right? Like we need inventory at all levels. And so I think this kind of even speaks to the whole kind of idea of, you need housing in your community for people at kind of multiple life stages, multiple income levels. And you want to have this kind of healthy housing ecosystem where people can age in your community and place, and that's difficult. I mean, I don't know of any housing market that's like, oh yeah, nailed it, we got it. But when we're talking about, assessing needs within a community, we're talking about looking at all of these areas to make sure, we have the resources people need. Now, usually I want to really emphasize kind of the last half of this continuum, which is where we start talking about permanent housing, right? Where we are talking about, hey, do we have enough affordable subsidized rentals in our community for our elderly to be able to age in place here? Do we have enough affordable rentals? Do we have market rate rentals? So for people who don't need assistance, but or don't qualify for assistance, are there still places for them to be able to rent? And then finally moving up through, are there starter homes? And, do we have market rate opportunities in our community? Because truthfully, if at any point in time along this continuum, you don't have a sufficient supply of homes, then you are going to start pushing people down the continuum. You are going to start seeing people be housing insecure. The largest growing segment of people experiencing homelessness in the United States right now are people over the age of 65. And it's because they are running out of affordable housing opportunities in their communities. So we want to make sure that we are providing enough at kind of the permanent housing end of this continuum to keep people from needing to sleep in their cars. And I would say even, 5 years ago, I would have said, gosh, you know what? This is more of an urban problem. We don't have to worry about this. I now talk with counterparts all across the state who will tell me that, like, oh yeah, we have campers, we have people sleeping in their trucks, we have people camping in the national forest, outside of town. So I think that this is something that is starting to impact more and more communities as we see fewer housing opportunities available. I think about it as the example of, like, if you've got a senior in your community who lives in what you would consider to be a starter home, and the choice for them is leave my house and move to the nearest community that can serve me with affordable housing, and that means I leave my community, they're not going to leave. They're going to stay in that house. And that's a house in your community that isn't open for the family that wants to come in and start their lives there. So it is important, as we're talking about assessing housing needs, we're going to have to look at every step of this continuum and who lives in your community now and who can't live in your community because these needs aren't met, to actually start developing strategies. And now I'm going to cough and give it to Larry.
Thanks, Tracy. So housing is, of course, very local, but what is happening around the state is really important, and it's good for us to ground ourselves. So we've all likely noticed that we have had a large amount of individuals moving into the state over the last few years, but we've also had a number of new builds to try to keep up with that demand. So the Montana Department of Commerce routinely shares housing situation reports that cover kind of population growth, housing inventory, and affordability. And as we look at population growth around the state, you can see on the map where growth has impacted demand for homes and affordability. So for instance, in Gallatin County, you can see a pretty big change as far as percentage of population. And I think a lot of people have heard in the news how expensive it is. I think at one point it was listed the most expensive in the nation. So knowing that that's happening in just that specific community, it also does affect you in your communities. The number of new builds to try to keep up with any growing demand has to outweigh it if you're going to make any movement in that continuum, or you'll notice that that housing deficit just continues and that constriction of availability just further increases costs for any resident that lives there. So it's
Larry,
good to just talk about it in that way.
And I might jump in and make one other comment on that. The other side of that, right, is that we're talking, because this is all supply and demand, right? So when, yes, like this demand for housing units is causing them to be increasing in cost. But the flip side to that is in the areas that aren't growing, you're seeing less investment in housing. And so that's the other side of that, is when we're talking about communities where they're like, we can't get someone to come develop here. And it's because the market isn't growing, and developers are not going to just go where they can make money. They're going to go to where they can make the most money. And so that is, I think, another challenge. You're looking at the state is almost divided in half in the challenges they're facing. One side of the state is facing, huge population growth and a demand for a limited supply of housing. You have other communities, those that are in red and pink, that are having less market investment in creating new housing. So even though they're not growing, they're still having a deficit in housing units because they're not getting any market activity. Sorry, Larry, I thought I should add that in.
Well, can I just also add that in those areas that are pink, there's not really empty houses sitting there. We've got some data that shows where the population might go down or stable. The number of occupied households stays the same, or sometimes it even increases. The number of occupied households increases even though the population goes down. It's like a trend of people living alone.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is that kind of more further highlights kind of the intersection in some of the other work that Tara and her team do around building up some more intentionality around building your area, especially in those communities that are more frontier and don't have that massive market demand. Is how do you kind of do a housing needs assessment so you can go out to developers and maybe market your community as this is why we need this and this is why you should come. So not to overshadow the future of the conversation, but that's a really good segue for sure.
We've got a couple of comments. Tina Toyne is from Hardin, and she says, Tracy, you're describing Hardin to a T. And Charatina Fritzler says, it's not just a shortage of housing, but a shortage of affordable housing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And actually, this slide actually talks a little bit about that. That not only are we short of units, but again, if you think about that continuum, that demand, right? It keeps pushing people at the bottom. They are the folks that are going to be less able to say, oh, well, I'll just stay in this rental for a little while. They're getting further pushed. So as you don't have maybe a sufficient amount of rental housing that is, not subsidized, folks are staying in their subsidized homes longer. Like there's a lot of things that happen, right? There's ripple effects up and down this continuum. And I know in the market that I live in, Markin, what we've seen is, yes, despite the fact that we have had tons of market activity, it has all been at the very high end of the market. It has not been at the affordable end. So it doesn't matter that we've added all these housing units if nobody can actually afford them. So where we are right now, kind of, and this last thing, this is the National Low Income Housing Coalition does a study called The Gap. We're short about 16,600 units that would be rental homes that would be affordable to an extremely low renter. Extremely low renters are folks who earn less than 30% of the area median income, but that is about 20% of the renter households across the state of Montana. And that is oftentimes you're thinking about folks, this is a lot of times like our elderly folks who are on Social Security income, for instance. They're going to fall into that ELI category. For every 100 of those households, there are only 42 units available to them. Even for folks that are earning 100% of the area median income, there are only 97 units. And that is the first time I have ever seen it in Montana drop below 100. It used to be, oh, for folks at 100% of AMI, there are 120 units. And then it's just dropped and dropped and dropped. And for the first time ever, we pulled this up and I was like, wow, there aren't even enough units for folks who earn median incomes to be able to afford rentals. So there 69% of your extremely low income renter households have what's called a severe cost burden. So that is paying more than 50% of their income toward rent. And that means that they are skimping on so many things, which is, of course, why we as a healthcare foundation care about that, because they are skimping on doctor's visits and they are not buying themselves healthy food and they're not filling their prescriptions regularly. So we are really concerned with the impacts of folks who are overpaying for their rent. The other things that this leads to are people who are living in substandard conditions or who are overcrowding. So there's a lot of reasons why availability of affordable housing for folks at the very bottom of the income scale is really important to communities.
Yeah, so to further on what Tracy was just kind of alluding to, housing is less affordable for renters, and that tight housing market's really left renters unable to move into first time home ownership, which further constricts the rental market. So, affordable rental scarcity has caused many to be severely cost burdened, like Tracy just said, by rental costs. A couple fun facts. I don't know if you want to call them fun, but to keep it lively, we will. Is that the median renter household income is a little over $45,000 a year, but almost 28,000 households pay over 50% of their income to housing and affording housing. And to afford fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Montana, someone with a median renter household income would need to work 77 hours a week, or they need to earn $19.28 an hour to afford that. So we're talking about really leaving out many essential workers in Montana, like nursing assistants who earn a median hourly wage of $17.83. So talking about it just more broadly, people living on low incomes continue to face an unfair burden of using a higher proportion of their incomes to afford a place to live, and that's not just in that's across everyone who's in the rental housing space, not just the people who are extremely low income. So we are talking about, your firefighters, your nurses, we're talking about a lot of people who live and work in the communities that we serve.
Yeah, so you saw in the title of this that we're talking about rural and really frontier type housing type geography. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between urban in Montana, I always say in quotes urban for Montana, which is the big seven, our bigger towns, Bozeman, Billings, Missoula, Great Falls, Helena, those usual suspects, the big ones, and then comparing the difference between those big seven and our frontier communities, which we call rural. Across the nation, it depends on who you're talking to, but all of our state could be considered rural. So affordable housing challenges in frontier areas differ significantly from those in urban communities due to unique economic, geographic, social factors. So here's some of the key differences. So in frontier communities, we have generally lower housing costs, but they're still pretty high. There's fewer housing options because there's lower density. And then it's geographically isolated, which very much impacts the higher costs for building, and it's harder for builders to even estimate because of the variability due to geography. And then, of course, we have lower services. Sometimes we don't even have some of those essential, skills like plumber, electrician. And then, of course, in frontier, we really are car dependent. So in urban areas, there tends to be some higher costs, but there's also higher incomes. There's a wider range of housing, more contractors. Infrastructure is intended to support that dense development, we don't really see that in rural frontier. They have more access to services and possibly even public transit.
Yeah, so there's a lot of differences between urban and frontier communities. Some others that we might think of that come immediately to mind is Tracy kind of talked about market rate activity. In urban areas, there are a lot more buying and selling of homes and market rate pieces that affect that affordable area, because in urban markets you have more comparables when you're talking about looking for other things. How much can I rent something for? How much can I sell something for? In a frontier community, that's a smaller subset, or it might be really old data because there hasn't been something that's sold like that, depending on the community, for a while. Some other things like Tara was talking about, the diversity in development. So there's zoning in urban areas sometimes, but they have more diverse development. They have more infrastructure to create denser developments. In frontier communities, sometimes there are different land use policies that can discourage some development types, but also they might not have as much zoning. So maybe think about that as a potential win category. Maybe that's a way that we can kind of move through that and work through that together. And then there's some other things to think about in urban areas, like if you think about Bozeman or Billings, there might be dedicated housing staff or nonprofits devoted to housing. And in your community, your frontier community, it might be left, there might not be dedicated housing staff. The people who are most interested and focused on housing the work might be up to community residents and organizers, maybe like some of you that are on the call. So trying to work through all of this together to ground us in understanding when we say urban, we are, at least in the state of Montana's terms, talking about the big seven. But when you're looking through some things online and things like that, when we're talking about surveys, sometimes their urban is really our, or their rural is our urban. Sorry, I almost said that backwards. Anything else you'd want to kind of talk about there, Tracy or Tara?
Yeah, I think I would add that, to say like, I think that's one of the kind of daunting things is like if you're in your community and you're like, oh, I want to like learn more about housing, and you get onto the Google machine and you're like, oh my gosh, and you start reading, and I will even go in and I'll Google, rural housing, and the first thing that will pop up is, oh, look at this amazing project out of Colorado in a town of 45,000 people. And I'm like, yep, I get that that is technically rural, but a town of 45,000, 30 minutes outside of Denver is not a rural community. They are dealing with completely different market dynamics than we are. So I think that it's kind of important to just think about what those differences are. And I don't think of them necessarily even as like pros and cons either. They're just differences. Because I think one key advantage, and I felt like this even when I was working in housing in Gallatin County, was that even though my problem felt big, it was way smaller than it was with like my truly urban counterparts around the country. I would be like, okay, we have 150 people experiencing homelessness. And they would be like, okay, I have 1,500 people. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a bigger problem. So I do think that that is like a key advantage that we have in rural communities is that, we are maybe talking about a smaller scale of need. It is easier to kind of look at that continuum and say, okay, if we had 4 new rentals in our community, it would actually make a really big difference. And that might not make such a big difference in a larger community. So I do think that there's a real advantage there. And I think also, not having dedicated staff it's a challenge, but like at the same time, when you have multiple organizations who all kind of have different visions and different missions, and they're all going after the same sources of funding, it's kind of nice to say, you know what, we got together as a community and we decided that this is our top priority, and we were able to get alignment on it because we didn't have 10 organizations to go through to make this happen. So there are fewer resources, but there are also a lot of advantages that rural communities have as they're working to address these issues.
Well, that's nice to hear the positive. I appreciate that. I feel like sometimes, in Montana, the challenges in the urban areas of Montana they overshadow the rural challenges. They're similar but different in scale, and I think the solutions are different too, potentially. All right, so what's next? Hopefully you're not all feeling daunted by this. We wanted to give you kind of an overview of the housing situation and some of the key concepts and these are all things that hopefully you'll be working on as we go forward. We really wanted to, with this whole series, to help you get a sense of where to start, the lay of the land for working on housing, and we want to give you some help in getting started. So there are some really great examples from around the state where small communities have come together, even with limited or most often no staff. They've come together to make something happen with housing. because there's not very many communities across the state that have a dedicated housing person. We might have a regional one. Some of those recent examples that come to mind are the folks in Gardner. It was just people coming together, volunteers and some local government folks. And some other parts of Park County have done that as well, in Bridger and in West Yellowstone. And what we can learn from these communities that have had this citizen-led or volunteer-led efforts is that they do need a champion, because housing is pretty technical. So you need a champion. You need somebody like Tracy or Larry or somebody like that who can champion your group and your town and support you. But if you don't have alignment within your community, if your folks aren't working together and they haven't worked through like what are your big priorities or what are your highest need, it's going to be really hard for you as a community to tap into that statewide support. So what we're going to talk about going forward is helping you figure out, you know what your community's resources are, you know what some of the opportunities might be, and you also know what the barriers might be as well. So getting started on this as a community group, as a group of volunteers, it doesn't have to be expensive. What you need to do is take some of that good data that's available that will help you find and combine that with your local expertise to get started. So our next session, which is March 6th, we'll be focusing on a housing needs assessment, sort of a 101 discussion. We're going to cover the basics of how to conduct a housing needs assessment, and you absolutely can do that on your own. And we'll help you through that. We'll help you find out where to get the information that you need to have in that housing assessment, how to get and use stakeholder feedback, or basically like a community survey. Stakeholders, meaning folks in your community that have a stake in housing, and how to use what you learn to address your community's needs. So that's where we're headed forward. And after that session on March 6th, we want to develop a cohort or like a small working group of interested communities that want to work together over the next few months to develop your own housing needs assessment. I guess what we're trying to help you do is avoid having to go out and find a bunch of money to hire somebody to do this. Hopefully you can be able to do this yourself because the information is out there.
Yeah, Tara, I would add, I mean, my vision for this has always been, when I did work in housing, it was easier to do. I mean, we worked in a lot of communities, and it was always easier to work in the communities that were like closest to my home base.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the communities that do have, strong housing partners nearby, it's great to be able to tap in to those folks for sure. And, we can talk about, if you're like, hey, I'm in this community, is there anyone who's doing this work? That would be one of the first, and that's kind of one of the first things we talk about even with the housing needs assessment, is sort of analyzing like who's out there who might be able to be a good natural partner. So you're not doing all of this yourself. But, one of the things I noticed was that there was like no shortage of really expensive consultants who were more than excited to come to our community and be like, oh yeah, for $200,000, we can do all of this for you. And $200,000 can go a long way toward meeting your housing needs. So I wanted to get away from, having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this type of work. It doesn't mean that it is always going to be, free, right? Like you may still need to have somebody come in and help you facilitate community meetings. You may say, you know what, actually this person has this skill. We're going to have them do it. This is kind of creating, I think our vision here is, can we create enough of a roadmap for folks that they don't have to go out and hire a really expensive consultant? They can figure out how to do most of it, on their own within their community, and get to what I've kind of said is like a good enough answer. Most of us are in like no danger of, over meeting our housing needs. So if we can get to what we think is a close enough answer, like we should get to work on that and save our money to work on that. And that's been sort of our vision with this is to help communities get to that close enough answer that you can go out and start doing the work and build momentum and then start really chipping away towards your needs.
Yeah, and I would add, Tracy, that when we're talking about the personal, you start working.
So let us know if you have questions. We have plenty of time for questions, which is kind of what we were hoping. Yeah, we really want to, because some of this might not be, this is a different language than probably what you're used to seeing. So if there's something that you want clarification, it's probably not just you that is wondering about it. So we'd love to hear your questions. And I can unmute you. I can't unmute everybody, but I can unmute individuals if you want. I'm happy to do that as well. While we're waiting for questions, we have Sarah says she has a small fourplex in Helena and wondering if there's any other landlords participating in these webinars. I don't know that. Maybe we do have folks.
I think Trina just below her says that she is also a landlord.
Oh, there we go. I missed that. Yeah. Oh yeah. Angela asked if we're going to share. Oh, we've got a bunch of questions now. Yeah, we will share. So I have everybody's email. So when you registered, so we can share the slides and we'll share the recording as well. So we'll email that out hopefully tomorrow, but it might be Monday. So we'll share all of that. Charitina asks, do you have information on other Indian reservations on how they're working through the barriers of acquiring mortgages on trust land?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Or maybe Larry, you might want to answer that too. Larry does a lot of mortgage financing. Of course, we work a lot with a lot of the native-led CDFIs that are really kind of leading the way through that. So I do think that there are some good resources out there to connect to. Larry, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I might just add, Tracy, that NeighborWorks Montana is part of and has created a Native American housing coalition to work on some of that stuff. And if you're interested in that, I can send you Tyler Baker is his name, who's part of our team that's working to lead that and get some momentum going there. So I'd be happy to send that to you if you want to send me a chat individually.
And Tina, I see your question here about, having a needs assessment, which yeah, Hardin is a little ahead and that you guys will have an assessment. So I think that, in our meeting on the 6th, we're going to talk a lot about the steps to do the, housing needs assessment. But then we'll talk about what do you actually do with the needs assessment once it's done? How do you ensure that it is not just another study that goes on the shelf?
Okay, so we have another question. Alan Davis is asking, I'd like to talk to a modular home builder to put a sample 2 to 3 bedroom sample house. Also try to find funding to pay for a lot and home. I think that would be one way to start a moving trend.
Yeah, so if you're interested in something like that, that is one of the ways that maybe going through the housing needs assessment, you might kind of say as your community, hey, what if we did this and we get some more kind of momentum going from that area? That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head many modular home builders that I could just spit out names to you, but if you want to send maybe myself and maybe Tracy, I see you're nodding your head, so maybe an email, maybe we could send you some ideas your way.
At the the small town summit that they had in Lewistown, organized by the commissioners there, they had, and I think I saw that somebody from Roy was on, they had this really cool session. Well, that's really what the whole thing was, really was like these little vignettes of they had a panel of giving examples. And one of the examples was buying or just taking down like a uninhabitable house. It was actually, the example was in Roy, and what were all the costs? And it was a really cool example because it kind of took away the mystery of what that might cost to make that happen. So I don't have that information, but Alan, maybe you could connect with the folk. There's somebody on here from Roy that did that, and it was really interesting to show, like, here's what it would cost to tear it down, here's what it costs to build the foundation, here's what it costs for the house, and then they had a realtor to say, well, this exact thing just sold for, it was like $300,000 in the last. It was crazy. Nicole Borner is asking, does anyone know how many Montana rural communities have done a comprehensive housing assessment? Do either of you have a sense of that?
I don't.
I don't, but I think based on the cost alone, a lot of our more rural communities have not done something that's as comprehensive as they might need for going after funding streams and things of that nature, and really getting some other statewide entities maybe involved in that approach. And that's one of kind of the goals, like Tracy said, of doing this work together and maybe thinking about becoming part of that cohort model. Is to just get more, if there's more information for any of the frontier housing communities we have in the state of Montana, we think that will be a win out of this work.
Would you say, I mean, just to put a finer point on it as to why would you spend the time to do this, is that it seems to me that it's the gateway for really anything, getting any kind of funding, talking with anybody about this sorts of solving their housing issues. Is that what you would say? A housing assessment is kind of the starting point?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it goes, I mean, I think there's a few points, right? One, I think, yeah, it's a starting point for sure to actually be able to bring in any funding. I think that, a housing needs assessment is usually, in my mind, it is part of a kind of broader community needs assessment, right? It is like, what does this community need to thrive? Housing has just come to the top of that so consistently for communities around the state that I think that it's pretty safe to move forward with housing in most of these communities. But I don't think that we should ever just exclusively focus on housing at the expense of all other things, because it is just part of a really healthy community. I think it also goes a little bit to Jake's point, right? That in Great Falls, they're doing demand assessments, not necessarily needs assessments, because in addition to attracting funding, you are also attempting, particularly in areas where you are seeing less market rate growth, you are trying to bring in market rate growth, because that is, the private market is the primary developer of housing. It is not nonprofit housing developers. So as much as we might try, we do still want the private market to come in, and having those demand assessments or needs assessments can help spur that on.
Great.
I saw a question here about fair market rents.
Yeah.
Fair market rents for the state did go up quite a bit. I think that, the question of like, how does that impact the rental market? That again, rental markets are, they're super localized. In many rental markets around Montana, the FMRs were well below actual market rents. And so folks who were trying to rent utilizing Section 8 vouchers could not use them. So in those markets, you're going to find that people are going to actually be able to place vouchers. It's going to be more competitive. I am sure that there probably are some markets where landlords were able to increase rents, just utilizing the FMRs as a justification for it. But I do think ultimately they get stuck if your rental unit sits vacant long enough, you'll adjust your rent accordingly. It was more of an issue of not being able to utilize vouchers in so many units across the state.
Can you say FMR, what that means?
Fair market rent.
Fair market rent. Okay. Is there a could you describe the difference between a demand assessment versus a needs assessment?
So I think the difference would just be an assessment of like the demand for new, to meet, as he's noting, they're enticing private developers to meet demand through new projects. A housing needs assessment is probably going to look at housing demand and who's in your community across also, in some communities, you might be able to meet those needs, not necessarily always through new projects. It might be a combination of factors.
So Emily is asking approximately how much time and resources should be set aside for a DIY needs assessment? Great question, Emily. You've got to have an idea about that, Tracy.
Yeah, I think that some of it depends on, I think the level of knowledge coming in. So if we're going to say like, hey, we're all starting at a base level of 5. And so we have a lot of learning to do. I do think that there is some learning that we all want to kind of do. So we're kind of just speaking the same language, even just like today in our discussion around area median income, right? It's like, it's kind of important just to be able to kind of have some shared language and know that we're all talking about the same things. Because when I say affordable housing, that means like 10 different things to 10 different people. And so we want to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same basic language. So I think that there's some time that goes into that learning. And some of that isn't going to be through the cohort. Some of that is going to be through homework. We are going to meet as a cohort for probably an hour. And then you might go away, and in the intervening time, you might have 5 hours of work to do as a cohort outside of those meetings. So I would say, if I had to guess, I'm going to say for the time frame that we're in the cohort, that I would expect that, in the weeks or in the months where we're just doing kind of data collection and type things like that, I think that we can probably do about 15 hours a month. In the months where you are doing more things like community meetings, actually, I think it'll be about similar because you're going to be holding meetings and preparing. So hopefully that is not too daunting for people. But I think that is particularly if we're looking at an abbreviated time frame, we can reduce the amount of numbers per month by extending out the time that the cohort runs. So those are discussions I think that we would probably want to have with the cohort of like, how much time can you dedicate to this? Because that's going to drive how long we work.
And as far as, money, I don't know. Do you have a sense about that, Tracy?
Yeah, I think that, and this is one of the areas where I do think that the Healthcare Foundation, has discussed that, we're willing to help provide financial support to communities who are willing to go through this process. I think that there might be things like data. You might buy a data pack, right, that talks about how your community is expected to grow. And those tend to be pretty inexpensive things, but they still can add up when you're doing a volunteer-led thing. We would also talk about, meeting space and, if you're bringing together the community to do a stakeholder meeting, do you have, how do you entice them to get there? So things like that. So I do think that we could do small grants to communities to help them through the cohort work.
I just want to call out Carrie Cohn she's the executive director of the West Yellowstone Community Foundation, and she's saying that they have done a DIY housing needs assessment, HNA, and she's saying what they did was they found another one and they basically copied it, including their own information, and that's great. I mean, that's basically what Gardner did as well. So
and that is the format that we would be following, is the one that
Yep.
West Yellowstone utilized, the localhousingsolutions.org format.
Yeah, it's really
for anyone who's really interested in being like, ooh, how could we jump ahead? I would recommend there is a website called localhousingsolutions.org. And they have a housing needs assessment kind of 101 where they talk about what elements go in. And it is a really interesting, they just talk about that process a little bit. So, but I would also recommend, looking at Carrie's and learning more.
And Carrie Cohn, she put her website, westyellowstonefoundation.org. And so she said you can look at their housing needs assessment, so you can kind of take a peek at what you're looking at, what you're in for. Okay, Jacob Coate asks, housing in gateway communities is often not viewed as shelter for residents and visitors, but rather as investment opportunities for wealthy residents or out-of-town folks. How can we navigate a conversation about affordable housing for locals in meetings with second homeowners and real estate professionals, motivated by the high and increasing cost of housing in the community? Anybody got any advice?
I mean, gateway communities, that's why I have to put like the generally in all of those like differences, right? Like gateway communities have really different market dynamics. And because I live in Gallatin County, a lot of my work has been in gateway communities. I think that one of the ways, and so, I think the Big Sky Community Housing Trust has done a really good job with this in working with and engaging folks who are second homeowners to put their homes back into long-term rentals, and and how they incentivize doing that. So I think that that's a great example to look at. There are, and I mean, most of the work that they do, they lifted from other areas. So there's a lot of good work going on. It is all really expensive work though, too. And I think that that's kind of the one thing in gateway communities. It is kind of what resources, are available. There are some resources available in gateway communities that we don't have in others, like the resort tax, for instance. And the resort tax carries a heavy, heavy load in addressing Big Sky's community housing needs. It's been utilized as well to help meet gardeners. So I think that's one place where gateway communities are totally different, and that's why we never want to say like, this is the solution for everyone, because every community is going to have something that makes it just a little bit different. But Big Sky Community Housing Trust has done a really good job with that.
And I am in Red Lodge, and I will put a plug for the Red Lodge Area Community Foundation. Man, they have done amazing things, and there's several folks from Red Lodge area work that are on our call. Yeah, they've done some really great work. They've partnered with, I think it's Trust Montana, to buy land and then to reduce the cost of homes overall. But it's a heavy lift. It's a lot, and they're lucky enough to have actual staff that can work on some of those things as well. So Jim Jarvis asks, will we be talking specifically about must be affordable housing funding opportunities such as HUD, USDA housing grants?
Yes, that'll be near the end of our process, because we'll be talking first about needs, and then we will be talking about matching strategies to needs. And part of that strategy matching will be looking at the resources available.
Great. Okay, if I missed your question, I apologize. I'm just kind of scanning back.
I think Nancy had a comment in here about community input. And yes, that'll definitely be part of our cohort discussions. Are how do you make sure that you get good citizen and stakeholder input?
Great. We definitely have time if there's something else that you're wanting to ask, because that somebody else also has that question. Tara's heading off to another meeting.
I did want to add just a quick plug. I don't have the website for it, unfortunately. But the Montana Cooperative Development Center is going to be doing a meeting on February 20th regarding utilizing cooperative housing models as a way to meet senior housing needs in communities. I wasn't able to find my
Well, we have
thing.
Nicole is on, Nicole
Oh,
Berner,
good.
and yeah, so she works with them. Maybe Nicole do you have a link, Nicole, that you can share? Or do you want to, I can unmute you. You can chat about it if you want. I can find you. Maybe she left. Well, you know what? We'll
Asked
look
how
for
to
that.
unmute. I think
I
I
have
can
to
find her.
do it for you and I can't find you. And
I got her.
you got her. Okay, great.
I think I can unmute her. It won't let me do it though.
Sorry, I can't.
I found her
Oh,
as
there.
an attendee.
There
So,
you go.
okay.
Nicole,
good.
you're unmuted.
Okay, just a second. I'm looking for the link right now, but
Perfect.
it is on okay, it is on February 20th.
We will we'll send the link around too when we send the slides and the recording. Oh, there she
Okay,
goes. There it is.
did it work?
Yep.
Yep,
Cool.
it's there. Thanks,
Yeah.
Nicole.
Oh, thank you, Tracy, for saying something as well. I appreciate it.
Do you want to share a little bit about it, Nicole?
Yeah, MCDC did a very large housing study exploring cooperative housing solutions for senior and workforce, and specifically for the seniors, not only the housing cooperative model, but the wraparound supportive services as well, and how that can specifically tie to rural communities. So the study has a lot of information about the different type of cooperative models, and then how we can take some of the um, uh, housing models that are happening around the nation and make them work for rural communities. Scale is always an issue, as we know, in our rural towns. But Tracy and I will be presenting this study and then a little bit more in depth about housing cooperatives. And then we've identified a few communities to have pilot projects in. So I imagine we'll be talking about that as well.
I
That
should
sounds
clarify,
great.
not this Tracy, Tracy
Yeah.
McIntyre.
Yeah, Tracy McIntyre.
Too many Tracys in the world.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. Glad to have you on and share that. And then Carrie Cohn is giving you another shout out that
Thank you, Carrie.
MCDC did a great community presentation for West Yellowstone a few weeks ago on housing cooperatives, because there are at least one of those going on right now. Great.
I saw some comments. Buildings Association of Realtors has done one. I know that the Missoula Association of Realtors does a really good housing needs assessment I think every year. We're not every 3, but so yeah, the larger communities do really have some good assessments to follow as well.
Yeah. So you just go out and find your own info and copy and paste kind of. All right. Got time for some more questions. Okay. Don Conklin of Trust Montana shared information of the community land trust model. I highly recommend working with her. Yeah, Red Lodge Area Community Foundation's work with Trust Montana. It's just been a great experience as well. Okay, Nicole, I'm gonna mute you back unless
Okay.
you've got more to add. We're happy to hear it. You do. Any other questions? Okay. Oh yeah, and Angela, I think is from Red Lodge Area Community Foundation. She's the housing program manager there. Trust Montana also has a resource for modular homes. I think somebody else mentioned that earlier as well. So maybe we can get that Angela, would you mind? Oh, I suppose it's just on their website. Great. Okay.
Yeah, so we want to say thanks to everyone who came on the call today. If you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but please do fill out the survey. There's a QR code on the screen, or I think there will be one that's also going to be sent out to you, or maybe it just might be when you log off this thing. No one quite knows and understands all the technology anymore. But please do fill it out and let us know how we can kind of continue to do this and what you're interested in as we move forward.
Yeah, we really would appreciate you completing this survey because that's going to help us really tailor the next session that we're having on March 6th to meet your needs. So you can do the QR code there on your phone, or you can just wait when you log off. It should put you out to our survey. And I will also include it in the email that we're going to send around with the recording, these couple of links, and the slides that we have. Really glad to have everybody with us today. Hopefully you can join us and share with your friends. We'd love to have more folks on. Consider gathering folks from your community together to watch together, have a little watch party, and you can kind of discuss it afterwards. It's a great way to go, so you don't have to be the one to convey all this to all your people in your town that are working on this as well. Really glad to have you. Great. Okay, well, I'm going to stop recording.